me just turn this volume level down just a tiny bit. And hello, everybody. It is time for the stream to begin. I think everything should be bueno here. It's been a crazy couple of days. I've been fiddling around with the the location of things on my desk, and still a work in progress. But everything on this side is working good enough, I think, to get the stream going. Part of the reason I say that is because normally I try to come up with some sort of plan for something to work on throughout the course of the stream. Last week's stream was in updating the item that I use, excuse me, the script that I use to clean the session in my Sublime Text and Sublime Merge session files to remove old projects, because somebody asked for a version of that that could clean old files and folders from the recently used folders list if they no longer exist, but leave all the other ones there. And we did that over the course of the last stream. I still haven't released that yet. I still have to do a little bit more testing because we only tested all of that stuff under Linux, and there's a little bit more things I wanted to do there. And with all the stuff that's been going on, I couldn't think of a really meaty topic to dive into for something package development related per se, like working on a new feature in Override Audit or tweaking up HyperHelp in some fashion. So I thought what we would do is play around a little bit with the plugin API, because in the recent builds that we have been using since late November, early December, when they started dropping in the Discord, there has been some new things that have been added to the API, and I've only played with a couple of them. So I thought it might be fun to sort of get our heads around a little bit of what that might bring us in our package development. And specifically, I have one thing in mind that seems to be really commonly asked for, which might perhaps be easy for us to develop. So let's go ahead and dive into that, I think, is what we're going to do here. And we'll try to remember exactly how all of this thing works. All right, I got it. I say something like, hello, fellow Sublime Text Fanatics. Welcome to tonight's live stream. Tonight, we will be doing some playing with the Sublime Text plugin API to see what sorts of things are possible and where those explorations take us. And if you're in the live chat down there, then feel free, if you have any questions, to drop them in the chat section, and we will see if we can answer them for you. But until that happens, let's dive on into the fun. Is that seamless? Could that have been super seamless? I'm not entirely sure. Oh, look at that. That seems to be okay. Cool. And all this stream, oh yeah, YouTube really wants me to know that as if it wasn't complicated enough to be live streamy type stuff and monitor the stream, that maybe I also want to reach over here and capture highlights out of the live replay, seconds after they're happening. I don't see that happening anytime soon. Um, so what's changed in this thing? Oh yeah, that thing I did for that thing we did last time, right? I'll comment that out for the time being. That's part of the playing that we did in last week's stream, actually. So do I have that open somewhere? I don't. We'll close that. We'll close that. That's an easy enough file to get to. So what we have here is the sublime.py and the sublime plugin.py configuration files. Oh, hello, Ashwin. Welcome to the stream. I was just thinking before the stream started, what exactly, the question that you asked, I think it was last week, about plugin APIs being different between the two, between the older Python 3.3 plugin host and the newer one. And the thought occurs that you could totally just diff the Sublime plugin.py files from both of them. And I actually did that in the terminal for the sublime.py file, and there's not a lot that's actually different between the two of them. So on the whole, that might actually work out, as a good way to say that. Which also reminds me that one of the things that I'd like to add to the snappy help, like so, is There's a well, this is the one for build systems because I was helping someone with something. Oh, I should fix that too. That's irritating. We'll fix that in a second. Um, but here in the actual help for uh, the API stuff, along with having things like this that say that things are documented or not documented, one of the things I wanted to add into this for a while now is a little number indication for what build of Sublime that was originally added in. And I actually came up with a script because I'm a data hoarder and uh, an explorer in Sublime, if you will. So we probably know, and if you didn't, you'll know now that the Sublime and Sublime plugin modules that are available to us in the plugin API are actually represented by Python files that are stored in the Sublime Text installation directory, and it's actually loading those files. So you can get a good sense of how the plugin system is working behind the scenes by looking at those files. And in Sublime Text 3 builds, the 3000 build series, those are just loose files that are right in the installation directory, like right alongside the executable. But in the newer 4000 build series, for the next things that are coming out, because there's two plugin hosts, they're stored in the appropriate portion of the lib folder in the installation folder, which mimics the one that's in the data folder where you could install your own libraries if you wanted to. And I had because I like to explore stuff in the API, and if I encounter a bug in something, if I'm going to report it, I want to do as much due diligence as I can to try to really narrow in on how it can be triggered, and also when it might have arrived, because that can help in debugging for the developers. So I have on my hard drive a copy of every publicly available version of Sublime Text 3, starting with build like 3008 or something like that. I can't quite remember, all the way up to 3211. And there's a few gaps in there because the developers sometimes do internal builds that they don't share with us if something goes wrong. There's at least one case where while they were switching over the way they do their compilation and build systems, they had a build that was out temporarily and then they redacted it, so that one's gone. And they artificially bumped the version number, the build numbers up to 3200 when Sublime Text 3.2 came out, because it was pretty close and that lined up nicely. So there's some gaps in there, but I have the tarballs of all of those and the Windows zip files of all of them. So I came up with a script that would load the Sublime plugin.py file out of Sublime Text installation zip file, the portable version for Windows, and convert it into an AST, the abstract syntax tree, and figure out what classes there were in it that derive off of things like the command class and what the methods in those things are. And then it spits out a big comma separated CSV file of all of the classes and methods and what build number uh, was seen in there. And you can give it a range of all of the a number of these zip files, and it'll pull through all of them, and then the output is the very first build where something arrives. And the idea behind that was going to be that every method in here would have a since 3211 or since 3007 or something along that line, so you'd know exactly what point something arrived in the build. And that it seems like it's going to be more important now that the API is sort of diverging, because there's two plugin hosts. So there's definitely going to be like a need for that, and possibly something for only in the 3.8 plugin host versus only in the 3.3 plugin host, or requires plugin host 3.8 or greater or something. So one of the things I'm sort of thinking about in the back of my head is how we might actually annotate the help in HyperHelp to be able to say that. and how to get at it, because I haven't tried it with these new plugin files, but I think enough stuff might have changed that it's not going to work. But by the same token, I think Will mentioned when they do the official documentation, they're going to do the same sort of thing there as well. Um, but there is a few things, and this is the version of this file from the plugin, the Python 3.8 plugin host here. I'm going to, just for our own edification here, squinch that like this. And then I can assume that anything that's in this lower pane is probably not visible to anybody because that's where my face is. Hello. But there is that the change log of things that are new in the API. And this isn't necessarily things that are new in only the Python 3.8 API, just things that are sort of new in the API in general. There's a few things that are 3.8 only, but by and large, a lot of the stuff here is actually stuff that will work in the other plugin host too, as far as the documentation is concerned anyway. And there's a new, the first list of things in here. The changelog says things like mini HTML now handles list style type, the CSS property circle, square, and disk. And the HTML doesn't really do it for me. Improved coverage of plugin profiling. That's not really something that we can test, although it has been a while since I did this. For a while, this wasn't working. Which I think has everything to do with how there's two plugin hosts now. The reason why they have to have, that's a good question. The question is, isn't maintaining two plugin hosts cumbersome? Why not just maintain the Python 3.8 one? That's because Python 3, when the version of Python changes, even in the minor version number, the binary interface and libraries are not guaranteed to stay the same. So while probably a lot of, or maybe all source code that's just pure Python probably works just fine in 3.8, because I think they try to maintain backwards compatibility at that point. Um, Sublime supports and Python supports the idea of loading externally compiled DLLs or shared object files or dynamic libraries, depending on what of the operating systems you're on, and those require native code that interact with the Python runtime. And that is definitely not the same between, as a matter of fact, it's so not the same that in order to create something for Sublime that uses something like that in your Python plugin, you need to compile your code that interacts with, dynamically with the Python runtime using the same compiler and compiler options, or similar ones to ones Sublime is using. Otherwise, it won't work. And the developers of Sublime aren't willing to just discard 3.3 out of hand in favor of 3.8, because there could be a lot of packages that would be affected by that change. And there's a lot of packages on package control that aren't actively maintained by the people that created them, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. Something, if it hasn't been updated in 6 years, that could mean that it's been abandoned and the author isn't using it anymore or doesn't care anymore. But it could also mean that there's no changes that need to be made to it. And this is one of those things that, I go over with Override Audit. I don't release stuff very often, but I do release fixes like we did a couple of streams ago when there's a bug fix. So do I need to, every 2 months just put out a new version just so it looks like it's active? That seems sort of dishonest, that people would expect changes. um, so that's why they're maintaining two plugin hosts. I don't know that they're planning on maintaining the two plugin hosts indefinitely. I think this is at the very least something that's meant to be for like maybe a year or two as we transition into the new system. And then maybe, at that point, support for the Python 3.3 plugin host will be dropped. But in the meantime, we have the ability to use both of them. And Sublime now has the infrastructure that when we want to go to the next great Python version, there's a gateway to do that because it's already set up. But I think on the whole, it's more or less the same between the two hosts. I gather, and I have played in the past a long time ago with actually embedding Python in an actual application to use it as sort of an embedded scripting language. And from my recollection, and this was like a decade ago or so, I don't think a super lot needs to change between one and the other. It's probably a matter of, for the most part, taking the integrations that you have for one and copying it and updating it and just compiling basically like two copies of the same code. And since the actual implementation of some of the things well, we can see it more in Sublime plugin. If I zoom down here, if I could actually find a thing. Well, I guess a bad example. This might actually be more in this one now that I think about it. It's been a while since I looked at these files, but you see a lot of stuff like this, like Sublime API status message and Sublime API error message. A lot of the things in the API are invoking something in Sublime API dot something and passing it arguments, and that's something that's imported here. There's not a file for this. This is actually, the plugin host itself. So these Python files here are the wrappers that allow us to look at this and to set up the stuff in Python. And the real core of the binary stuff is in that Sublime API library, which probably, because it's part of the application, doesn't need to change so much. So I don't think it's probably definitely a pain in the butt, but it's probably not as bad as it seems like it would be, if that makes any sense. Like I said, it's been like a decade or more since I did that. I decided that if you want to have a plugin, a programming language embedded as a scripting language, then my personal choice is Lua for that, because it was written primarily for that purpose, for two reasons: to have a syntax that you don't need to be a computer scientist to read, so you could use it to declare data structures and as a data language as well as a scripting language, and to be embedded in things, which is why its standard library isn't as, say, coherent or robust as Python's is, because it's really meant to provide you the ability to add programmability to your applications, which really should be up to you, what that is and how it works, which is not how it works in Python. Um, but there are a few different things that we could play with here. Some of these I'm not 100% sure what they might actually even be. Um, Oh, and before we get started, I have another window over here with this Untitled plugin. Someone asked a question on Stack Overflow, because they're running a programming language of some sort that is very specific. And I don't know if this is specific to the language and the tools or the way this person is using it, that the version of the programming, the compiler that you use depends on the path that the file is stored in. So there's a certain segment. It says like C program files app 9 and then the name of a program, and that 9 means you should use compiler version 9. And he wanted a custom build system to be able to extract that out. And so I wrote this simple thing here. And this seems like one of those things that should go in the stealthy and hasty repository, but Untitled.py is my go-to for creating temporary plugins when I'm helping people. So I should probably rename this from Untitled to appbuildexec.py instead. Just so that we don't get anything untoward happening. And then I think we can go ahead and close that. I'm going to quit this and restart it, because as you have noted, Ashwin, sometimes things don't necessarily unload the way that you think they do, which has a lot to do with how Python uses memory management and garbage collection and reference counted garbage collection. So reloading a class doesn't necessarily throw all the versions of it away until everything that's using it gets garbage collected. So that can be a bit of a problem in some cases. The build system live stream was helpful after watching the build system series. Oh, I'm glad I could help. Yeah, I was, I think I need to go back to that a little bit for at least one more video because since I wrote the one on interactive builds, Terminus has been enhanced to be even easier to convert build systems. Uh, the original was based on the idea that Terminus takes almost but not quite the same arguments as exec. You have to throw some of them out because Terminus will get mad at you if you use them. Um, but otherwise, it'll all work out. And now there's a Terminus exec and a Terminus cancel that take all of the arguments, I think, and then they just call the other one so that it's really easy to convert a thing. And I've noticed one of the problems a lot of people have is with build systems in general, and I don't think it's something I can help with in a video per se. It's that Sublime is a text editor and not an IDE, and IDEs are famous for they give you a configuration dialog that says these are the three files in my program, and it does all of the work of compiling it and building it and running it and stuff like that. But Sublime very much, although it's powerful and can be set up to run programs and compile them and build them, you really have to know the tools of the language that you're using in order to do it. So you have to know how to execute the Python interpreter to set up something Python related. And particularly um, in C, you have to know how to compile a program to an object file and how to link all of your object files into one final executable in order to run it. And that's not as straightforward or not as straightforward as Python. It's really easy when you get the hang of it. But if you spend a lot of time using um, IDEs, they could like shield you from knowing how to do that sort of thing. And a lot of problems I've noticed on Stack Overflow, whenever there's a build system problem, that it ultimately comes down to someone doesn't know what tool they need to execute or what commands they need to execute in what order to make what they want to have happen. And the general rule of thumb is if you can conceive of something that you could type into the terminal as a sequence of one or more commands, you could turn that into a build system in Sublime and automate it, not even with Terminus, just with the standard exec command if you wanted to. It's all about actually knowing how to do that. And that's not the sort of thing that I can really help with. But maybe something on being able to, I think somebody wanted to know how to use Terminus for Python. And the idea there would be that you have to use this to look at the Python build. I've overridden mine, but then you would have to know how to copy this and create a new build system, paste it in, and add the appropriate target. Maybe that's a helpful thing, but maybe it's not. If you didn't know what sort of thing that you're supposed to be doing. C is especially egregious for that because very few C programs are more than one C file. And anytime you have more than one C file, or you need to use some library, you're in trouble using the standard C single file build, like this one. There's one for C and one for C++. They're both, identical, but GCC as the compiler has an option that allows you to compile something and create an executable out of it in one shot. So it's very easy to say compile a single program to an executable and then use the shell operations to run the thing you just ran. And that'll work if your C program is one file. If your C program is two files, you're screwed. You have to modify this to not only compile file, but also to compile the other file, the secondary one as well. If you are using a library like SDL, if you're making a game or something like that, there's an argument you have to pass to the linker to tell it that along with the code of your application, there's also other libraries that need to be linked together. And that ain't in this build file, so if you have to use a library, you're screwed, even if you're using only a single file, because this you'd have to modify the build. And if you decide that you're working on two C programs that are distinct and each one of them is one file, but each one of them uses a different library, you're screwed because your build system needs to have that library hard coded. And that's why It's very much not a good idea to use this build system for C or C++ except for very simple programs. And unfortunately, the most simple programs are interactive ones that ask you your name or ask you for some input and then provide a value, and those won't even work in Sublime anyway. You really want to use a proper tool for that, and it just really goes off into the weeds, kind of like this discussion. But that is something I have been thinking of doing a little bit extra in that thing. I'm not entirely sure what the best way is to do that. So I'm thinking that an update on using Terminus and how it's a lot easier now, combined with something that describes how you would find and to convert a build system, might actually not be as hard as all that. If you knew that you were using the Python build, you could look for a python.sublime build file or a C++ single file Sublime build or something like that. So that might actually work out. I'll have to look into that. Um, we're going to go ahead and create ourselves a new plugin here, though. A dynamic build system to run npm scripts. That's interesting. What would that require? What exactly would that entail? Is I may not be 100% certain what an npm script is. I am doing web development currently at work. As a matter of fact, that monitor over there that you can't see, my both of my work monitors actually. Um, Oh, right. Okay. I thought there was something on my monitor, but that terminal is just translucent. They have a web script on there, but we actually use Yarn instead of NPM for reasons. And to me, NPM scripts or Yarn scripts are those things you can add into your package JSON file to tell it to generate a particular command line, like using npm build to trigger a TypeScript compile or something. That's an interesting use case for that, though. Ooh. I got a new travel coffee mug that is insulated, and as a result, I managed to burn my tongue on my coffee 100% of the time. But when I'm walking around outside in the cold, that comes in handy. Incidentally, um, yeah, the npm scripts defined in package.json. Yeah. How exactly is your dynamic thing working? Does it give you a list of scripts that you could run and then generate a build to do it? Because you might be able to do that with a custom target and a variable that expands or something. We want to create an event listener, I think. Whoops. Yeah. And, oh, does this even say? Yeah, it's just event listener, right? Yeah. Oh, I'm going to do very quickly this. So that I have, whoa, that's tiny. Console. I'm going to pin this. Da, da, da. Where's the, oh, it's on. Always on top. That's the one. I lost track. Oh, there's a little pin icon there. Yeah, that's the one we want, right? Beauty. Okay. That's a little thing I do incidentally. I like to have a window open on another monitor that's got the console panel open as wide as it can be, so that as I'm building stuff, I can just look to the right to see if there's an error, which I think for streams makes it a little nicer for the purposes of having more screen real estate to do stuff. At the expense of sometimes I refer to error messages without doing this so that you can see that the plugin totally reloaded properly. And I totally made that always on top in a way that is, whoa, obscuring my ability to read the change log here. I wanted to just have a build system written into build file for each script based on what I choose from a quick panel. Yeah, I think that's neat. And that's like one of the things that I really love about Sublime is the ability to configure it in a way like that. Um, that's the sort of thing that could possibly be uh, done by you. using a custom build target that has a variable that you use when you expand the thing. Hmm, I'm not sure. That'd be an interesting thing to play with, though. What are we going to do first here? Maybe I'll just unpin that for a second because that's going to drive me mad. Oh, wait. Oh, that's not the thing I thought it was. Excuse me. Always below other windows? Same as other windows. That's the one. Okay. The first thing in this list is on-query completions can now return suggestions asynchronously, return command completions, and include symbol kind information. I've already played with that in the past, so I'm going to skip on that. New on init is called once with the list of views opened before the plugin was loaded. All right, well, let's take a look at that and see what that is looking like. Doop. Trigger the on init method. Okay, yeah. It's going to be like that, is it? All right, well, and I'm going to assume that we want to define an on init that's just that. Called once with a list of views. So I'm going to say that it probably looks like this. And say that. And wow, well, that worked. As soon as you save it, it immediately gives you the list of all of the things. That is neat. We might say v dot file name or v dot name for v in views instead. And then every time you save the plugin, I have word wrap turned on, that's good. The list of, oh, interesting. The console is in the list. Oh, sorry. No, that's a tab that's over in this other window. Pardon me. If I did that, it won't say that anymore. Ooh, that almost would have been confusing. So yeah, if you ever wanted to be told, there some times in a plugin you want to store information on a file by file or tab by tab basis. That can be a problem for you if the plugin gets reloaded. But I think we'd also see here, I'm going to, well, let's close that for the time being. I think because this is defined as once with the list of views opened before the plugin was loaded, that I think the plugins get loaded at restart time. So I would imagine that this should trigger after on a restart as well with the same event. So let's test that and see what that's doing. And there it is. So that is crazy handy. Although I can't think off the top of my head why I would want to do that right now. I know I have in the past wanted to do that. On exit is called immediately before plugin host exits after the API is shut down. That one is a little trickier to test. On exit, that's just going to be this, right? And we're going to say Sublime is exiting, and we're going to save that. And in order to see that one doing anything, we're going to do this. If you run Sublime from the console with the minus debug argument, anything that it would display inside of its own console will get output here. So, or at least that used to be the case. So we can see, oh, it's not going to do that now. Oh, man. Oh, that is a real rip snorter. Whoops. That used to be a thing before the ability to capture standard in works. Does Eventlistener listen to events for the entire application? Yes, it does. Event listeners are events as a whole, and view event listeners are event listeners that are specific to only one specific file or tab, or multiple tabs if they edit the same thing. Before we get into that, can could I say this? Does that work? No, huh? All right. Well, we're gonna cancel on testing on exit in that case. I'll add a pass in here. No, I won't. I'll leave that there. Actually, I guess that should be fine because there's actually stuff there, right? Yeah. Okay. We'll go like so. Yeah. The only way to actually test that this is doing something is to do something that has an effect outside of Sublime. You'd use something like this if you spawned a program in response to something. Then you'd want to know that it's time for you to terminate it. LSP would use this, for example. It used to be that if you started Sublime from the console with minus minus debug, it would display what it would have displayed to its own console to your console, but it's not listed as an option here. But the ability to capture stuff into standard in is now there, so maybe that has modified something. But just to answer your question here, what's an example of an event listener that we might want to do something with this? We could say on text command, for example. So here, if I said, oh wait, is that the simplest one of these to do something with? On deactivated, on activated. Yeah, let's go ahead and do something with that. So if we said on text command like so, then this requires what arguments? We get told what view the text command is executing in, and the name of the command and the arguments that the command got. And then we could say global like this, and then we could say %s, 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 and then go view.filename or view.name command args like this. How to work with Subble? Yeah, that might be something that would be a good idea once the new thing comes out, actually. That's also interesting because how you set it up is different across all of the platforms, and that might be an opportunity to create a video on more than just Windows, because I do have the ability to capture video on Linux, obviously, and I also have a copy of the thing that I use to capture screens on Mac OS as well. So I should add that to the list. So thanks for that suggestion. I'm not going to take time to dig out my pad of paper at the moment, though, because I'd have to stand up. So here's an example of this. If we had this on text command here, then every time a command executes, we can see it happening in the global scope. So it's happening there. And maybe even for our purposes here, we would take out the file name. But that just shows that when this event handler triggers, you get told what view the event is happening inside of in this case, which is any and all views. If I move up and down in this tab, we see that going like that. If we do it in this file, we see it happening. If we do it here, anywhere across Sublime where a text command is about to be triggered, this event handler is triggered to tell us what command was executed and what arguments. And you could use that if you just wanted to know that something was happening. And you could also do weird stuff like if command is equal to move and args.get forward equals true, then return move and oh shoot, we do something like this. Args.forward equals not, don't do it that way. Args forward equals not args forward, like this. And now when I try to go to the right, I still go left. And pushing left goes left, and pushing right goes left. And we have to turn that off. So one of the reasons why you might want to capture a text command is to rewrite the command that gets executed to be something else. You can also return none to say that you don't you want to just let the command go through, which is what's happening here by default. And the other thing we could do is say this. Any command that doesn't exist when Sublime tries to run it, it just doesn't do anything. Works with the key binding, works with the menu, works here. So now left goes left, but right does nothing because we have said that we're going to run that command. And I think if we even said log commands true, you can see that when I do it, the plugin is rewriting the command to be something else. I'm going to take that off because otherwise I'll break my brain. But this is, because it's an event listener, it happens everywhere all throughout Sublime. So here, here, and here. If we said class other test event listener, and of course the name doesn't really matter like it does with commands, but it was a view event listener instead, then this works the same but is slightly different. We could say on text command. We still get a self. We don't get past a parameter of view because this is a view event listener. It's associated. There's one instance of this associated with every view in the file. So we don't get the view, but we still get the command and we still get the args. And so then here we could say print view and %s mod command args like so. And in this case, we see it happening in every file anyway. And that's because there's an extra element that we can do in here. We can say class method is applicable, which gets the class, because this is a class method, and a settings object. Sublime invokes this is applicable thing every time the settings of a view change to ask your event listener, do you apply to a view that has these settings? And if you reply yes, an instance of the view event listener is created and attached to the view. And if you say no, then, or false, I guess I should say, then one isn't created. The default implementation of this always returns yes. So we could say settings.get syntax and Python is equal to python.sublime syntax like this. And assuming I know how this works, what's that say? Oh, whoops. It's not a method call. Excuse me. It's a thing. Does view event listener activate on a file that shares a buffer from another view via cloning? As a matter of fact, it does. So we can see here that that event listener isn't tracking. Let me just double check that I picked that syntax right. Hang on. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. I'm going to turn off command logging before I go crazy here. And this should be this. So we're saying here that this event listener is a view event listener, but it's only applicable to views where the syntax setting is Python. So if I push left, we can see it triggering in the view and globally from that one up there. But over here in the help system, we only see it triggering globally and nowhere else. If I was to say new view into file and spell it correctly, and I'm going to move this over to this tab over here. In this one, the setting is, the syntax is Python, so it's triggering there. This one is Python, so it's triggering here. This is a clone of that view, but you'll see that it's not triggering right now. There is an item here, and I'm going to have to look here for this one. This is something that you need to do in here. If you want your event listener to work with a clone, and again, over here, this one is not working with the clone right now. but we could say that we want to define a class method of applies to primary view only, which only gets the class that doesn't get any argument. The default of this is returning false or returning true, but if we return false in here, then this event listener applies here, and it also applies in this clone as well. You see it triggering down here now in a way that it didn't before. And if I set this back to true, then it works here, but it doesn't work here. So you have control over if you want that to happen or not. Now, there's the global event listener triggers everywhere. This one only triggers in this view. It's in a view where these conditions apply. So whereas there's exactly one instance of test event listener created that listens for events no matter what, and if you wanted this to only apply in some Python file, then in your onText command handler, you would yourself have to check the settings in the view to make sure that it's not a clone and that it has the syntax of Python before you do something. Whereas here, there will be one instance of other test event listener created for every view where these things apply, and this gets reinvoked when settings change. So over here, this is triggering. Over here, it's not triggering because we set that thing back. So I'm going to set this back to false like this. So now it's triggering here as well. And it's triggering because this is a Python file. But if I set the syntax to C, now it's not triggering anymore here, and it also won't trigger here because this one, this one is, well, actually, that should that still be happening? I think the fact that the syntax changed in this one is ancillary to the fact because the syntax is supposed to be a view-specific setting. So the way that the command palette sets that may be doing something a little funky, which is an interesting way to go with that, I would think. Let's try it this way. It's that way too, huh? Oh, yeah, but there is other issues with that. SynPy, put that back. Well, nevertheless, the fact remains that that is the case, even though weirdly view settings are cloned in a way that you wouldn't expect. I guess if it's a clone, the clone is it should be the view should be different in a clone, but the buffer ID should be the same. Whoops. The view.buffer ID is 29 in that one and 29 in this one, but of course, not in this one because that's not a clone. The buffer being the same is what makes this a clone. The views are supposed to be distinct. That's what allowed the selections are a view property. You'll see doing this doesn't select over here. So it's really weird that changing the syntax does that weirdly. But that is an example of that. And so one reason why you might want to use a view event listener instead of a regular event listener is so that you don't have to do these sorts of tests. You do them once. If you have 5 events that you're triggering and they all need to apply just here, then it's I guess nicer that you could just have them here. Your event listeners can just the events themselves, the handlers don't have to even concern themselves with whether or not they apply. They can just do whatever. Whereas if you did it with one of these ones up here in a global event listener, if you will, then you'd have to do a bunch of checks. And the other reason for that might be if your event is something that is potentially, I don't know, what might slow something down or processor intensive or something along that line, like doing something every time the selection changes, then maybe you want to use a view event listener instead of a regular event listener, because with a global event listener, the event will trigger every time the selection changes, no matter what. Even if you don't care about it right now, it's still going to happen. Whereas if you use the view event listener, it can only happen if the user at least has one view that is created of that type. So you can get some performance benefits that way. And also, we can do something like this. And let's see how well this works. We did self.count and self.count equals self.count plus 1. The number goes up every time. And if there's another view, the number in this one is distinct. In this view, I've done it 6 times. Over here, I've done it 21, 22, 23 times. Down here, that's the first time I did it, because there's one instance of this created for every view that it applies to. Why does the view event listener have an async flavor? Are non-async methods not thread safe? According to the API documentation, everything is thread safe. You would only use the async version if you're doing something that's going to take some small amount of time, because while Sublime is invoking, say, on text command here, for example, or on selection modified, or the new on text modified, assuming that there's an async version of it, and there is, then it can't do anything else. So you need to be wary of that. If you use the async version, the event still happens, but it happens in not the main UI thread. It happens in a different thread instead. But they're all still thread safe just the same. What's a nice example of something like that as an event listener? On selection modified, for example, I'm going to comment this one out for the time being and play with that. And we could say on selection modified. So this is going to get triggered every time the selection changes in a Python file based on how we have this set up. And I'm going to take this out so that it only applies to the primary. And one positional argument view. Oh, whoops. I was looking at the event listener one, but we're in a view event listener, so it doesn't get a view argument. So the global event listener is still doing that one, and this one is printing global. Now, what if I did something like, anybody remember how you sleep in Python? Is it something like this? Selection change to the left, and Sublime is hung for 4 seconds or however long I put there, because it's handling that event because the selection changed. So the entirety of the whole thing changes. So we'll note down here, it says changed, changed, changed. I'm going to push the down arrow. So there's 3 changed there. And I'm going to do it up in this view. Push down. We don't see it change there. We don't see anything here. And then we have to wait some number of seconds. And now it happens. So if you were doing something that took 4 seconds or 1 second or even a fraction of a second, but a large fraction of a second, then the entire Sublime UI will hiccup as a result. And it's going to be tricky to set that out like so. Okay, so now we're safe again. I did that in the wrong place, didn't I? Yeah, I meant to do that down here, but the same thing still applies. um, Whenever the selection modifies, that happens. If I change this to async, like so, then I can put that back. Now, when I change the selection, I did it like a bunch of times, and after we wait 4 seconds, we can see all of those changed items spooling down into the console in the same relative sort of time that they were, done. Each one of those was deferred by 4 seconds, and the async version of the event is running in a separate thread that's alongside of the main thread. So it still lets you do whatever you want to do, but it doesn't hang Sublime. I'm still free to modify the selection up here as much as I want, and all of those things will slowly just keep happening in the background. One thing to be aware of when you do that is that the state of files could potentially change between the time when you thought the event happened and later. But Sublime is pretty thread safe, so you, like for example, a view object would still persist, but its view ID would be something that lets everything know that it's not valid and things of that nature. That async thread is the same thread that gets invoked if you use Sublime set timeout async. What you're saying is schedule this to run at some point in the future, but based on running in that asynchronous thread instead of in the other one. I think that should be cool for that. I need, oh, actually, this seems like a job for a big jug of ice water. Let's see how well this goes. This is very heavy and full of ice, but refreshing. One event that I am interested in here, as a matter of fact, is on text changed. It looks like it's going to get a view and a changes object. This is something that's new. One of the things that people have wanted to do for a while is know what text has been modified in the buffer. And right now, the only way to really know that is to use the on selection modified, because every time the cursor location changes, um, something has happened in the buffer, and then you could like do investigations to see what does the buffer content look like now based on what it looked like the last time I knew where the cursor was, and something that happened in between those spots is probably what's happening. Let's do this one up in this one. I'm going to comment that out to, oops, I do that. This is on text changed, and there's an async version of this as well. And let's say we print view.filename or view.name and changes. See what happens. The file name and, oh, a text change object. Interesting. That must be in here somewhere. Maybe it's in this one. Don't type it yourself. There we go. A, B, and string, and there's one of them. All right, so it's a region with the content in it. Incidentally, one of the questions that you asked in the Discord the other day was, how do you learn about these settings? And one of the ways that something might happen in that regard is if you start playing with stuff before it's being properly documented and you dig around, you end up, experimenting and learning things that you might not have otherwise known. So we're going to say from %d to %d, and then that, and then go changes.a, changes.b, and changes.stir, like so. Because it looks like what it's telling us here is when the change happened, what position, from what position, what text changed. So up at the top, it should be something like 0, 1, and an A if I push the A key. List object has no attribute A. Oh, it's a list of changes. Ah, okay. I did not pay enough attention to that output. Yeah, that's totally a list. Okay. For change in changes, we'll do this. And then change these to be change. Whoops. Put these to be change. Okay. Try that again. Really? Oh, it's not a number. It's a historic position. Okay, well, good grief, man. I'm going to swap these to be %s's then. Questions are not stupid if you don't know the answer. There's a lot of questions that I've seen where I don't like, well, let's say this. I don't like to say that there are such things as stupid questions because if you don't know the answer to something and you don't know how to find the answer to something, then you have to ask the question of somebody that does know, and that's how you learn. And you may feel sheepish if the answer in retrospect is obvious, but that's not always the case. And what's obvious to one person might not be obvious to another person. So it's not really like a thing that you should judge someone on. And it's not something that I tend to do in the general case because I've been writing software since I was in grade 5 working in BASIC on a ColecoVision Atom, and I'm sure all of the good friend of mine that's a few years older than me that got me into software development, I was asking him questions, and I bet my questions at the time were ridiculous to him having more experience. It's really a matter of perspective. With all that said, a couple of days ago, someone on Stack Overflow posted a question about something they were doing with Sublime, where if they run this program while Sublime is running, then this program fails. And why does this program fail? And how can I fix it and stop it from failing? And the answer to the question was the reason it's failing is there's this system in Linux called iNotify that Sublime and other applications can use to watch for changes in a file or a directory. It's the thing Sublime uses to know when new plugins are appearing or when plugins are changing. This other software that this person was using was trying to watch files on the file system in the same way. There's a finite limit to the number of file watches, iNotify watches, that there can be on Linux. And if you run out of them, then you have a problem. But it's really easy to change that value and bump up the number if you need more of them. They take a small amount of memory, like 30 or 40 bytes or something. So the system usually doesn't have like billions of them because that would be crazy. But it's really easy to update this. And in the normal case, that is really something esoteric that if you weren't intimately familiar with the intricacies of Linux and how programs monitor files and stuff, that is a very good question, like what the ever loving crap is going on here. However, in this person's case, the error message said, I ran out of space, and then it said, maybe you've run out of iNotify watches. To check if you have run out of iNotify watches, run this exact Linux command. If you want to have more of them, run this exact Linux command. So if this person had read all the way to the bottom of their error message instead of stopping at the top and going, or done any sort of research, and it maybe they did but it doesn't seem like it, then they would have had their answer to their question on their own without having to ask on the internet, with the associated time cost of waiting for someone to come along and answer. And if there is a such thing as a stupid question, that might be one, because 2 lines down from the error message was the actual answer to his question. Not only did it say exactly what was going wrong, it even said how to fix it, which is not something that a lot of software does. It tends to just throw weird esoteric errors and leave it to you to figure out what is actually going on there. Interestingly enough, the error message is no space left on device, which would make you think that you're running out of hard drive space, but it has something to do with the way the internals of the Linux kernel tracks iNotify instances. And someone said, maybe you ran out of disk space, and his answer was a rather condescending, no, I have plenty of space on that drive, thank you. Perhaps a little bit misplaced. So yeah, I would, oh, whoops. I would never be worried that if you're asking questions like that they're stupid or anything like that. Sometimes things are obvious and sometimes they're not. And every time you ask a question and get an answer, it gives you more background so that next time you might not have to ask. You might be able to find it out yourself. Like you said yourself, you can spend some time in the API playing with it, looking at files, looking at other plugins, and you start to you'll get ideas for things that you didn't know how they worked, and it start seeing what somebody else is doing with it can sort of give you an idea of how that's happening. So it's all a big learning experience for everybody. For example, something like this. Does this have a point, a row, and a column? All right, well, I'm going to guess in this case, based on the way that this is working, the change.a.point and change.b.point is what I expected this to actually be. I'm going to guess that historic position has 3 different things: a point, which is a text buffer, and then it also nicely gives you the row and column so you don't have to figure it out for yourself. So in that case, if I was to, no, don't do that. And if I was to press the A here, I think now it should not error and give us the 0 and a 1 and then the letter A because that's the letter I pressed. And, 0 to 0. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. If I did it because the text at spanning the region 0 to 0 was modified to be A. So if I did this and pushed B, now I should get 0, 1, B because I'm changing the span of text from position 0 to position 1. There we go. 1, 2, you say? Well, that doesn't seem technically correct. Oh, wait. I think I should do something like that. Because some of these things may be blending together. Okay, let's try that. Here, it went from the region 0 to 0 was replaced with A. That, I think, replicates if you used the view.replace call with a region of 0 to 0 with A. That would be the same as inserting text. If I select both of those and type B, I end up with the region 0 to 0 being replaced with B, and then 1 to 2 being replaced with an empty string. Is there some logical way that makes sense? Because I would have expected it to be 0 and 1 changed to a B. What if I do it to a C? Do I end up with 3? No. That works the way one might expect. If I cut this out, shoot. Let's clear that and see. There could be a logical reason for why this is doing what it's doing, or maybe my test is just broken. One of the more common debugging problems is actually using broken code to debug, which makes things a little tricky to pull off. 0 to 49 was replaced with nothing. All right, well, I mean, that makes sense. 0 to 0 was replaced with that. Yeah, that also makes sense. That extra empty string is a little weird, and I'm not sure what that is supposed to represent, to be perfectly honest. Does this say anything? On text changed and on text changed async provide detailed modification information. Um, and that's all that is listed there as an item. So we can definitely see that happening. And I can't think of a reason why there needs to be one additional thing when something like that is happening. From 0 to 0 is A, and from 1 to 7. I guess it's telling me about additions and erasures. That must be what it is. It's saying that position 0 to 0 was replaced with an A, and positions 1 to 7 was replaced with an empty string. Okay. I guess that makes sense, and it's probably powerful. I think, yeah, I think that's the case. The empty string is indicating that something was deleted. So I think it's trying to be clever about what it's doing. That one all came in as one big string. If I replace two things with one thing, see, I would kind of expect that something like this should say from 0 to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 should be the string A if I push A to let me know that the text of the buffer went from 0 to 5 changed to an A. But that's not what it says. It's going to say 0, 0, A and then 1 to 5 empty string, right? Or 1 to 7. I can't count. So I think it's trying to give us the text change as a combination of this text was added and the remainder of the text is an empty string, so that you could do something like if you counted all of the text positions for the regions that this spans, it would give you the full length of the text that was modified, and then you could use this information to plug in exactly what parts of it were changed. That does make some logical sense for being able to do something like this in a powerful way. That one was one too many. I'll take that one out. Oops. All right, I can't do that now. Shoot. All right, I'll just go again. Dun, dun. What happens if I push A this time? Lots of stuff changed. One of those was a two-character selection, so I think that first one went. But we can see all kinds of modifications here, including the undos putting stuff back. So yeah, I think that it happens when there's a selection and, oh, actually, let's do this. Save that. If I was to replace this with this, then I think we should end up with a 0 to 7 impart. Still no, huh? 6 to 12 empty. I guess I'm trying to think of it more in the sense of what the mini diff tells you, which is entirely different. But this is saying that there are 12 characters that were changed. I guess because it's tracking the insertion and the deletion. I'm going to say that that's interesting, but I'm not going to delve into it too more for the time being. I need an actual use case for why you'd want this information to be able to do something with it, I think. Um, New methods on reload, on revert. That's interesting. I'm imagining that would be if a file was reloaded or reverted. The thing that people have asked about a bit, and I'm going to, let's just clean this up just a titch by going like that and quit and restart this, just to make sure all of our events are kosher here. If we said on reload, um, get rid of that. When might this actually trigger? Would it re-trigger if we said reopen with encoding? Does that count as a reload? Perhaps not. Um, Whoops, I need to go to, if I touch this, does that count? Yes. And that seems to be all there is to it. So we could say reloaded and view.filename or view.name. So if I came down here and did that again, actually, I guess I could just do that. I could have done that here, and then we could maybe see it happening. CD user. I don't think it will be reloaded until Sublime gets to focus, but we can see we can mimic the reload message. So that's handy, and I would imagine on revert does the same thing. We'll go ahead and change this. And in that case, we could probably say this is what does it. And reverting, like catching that, is something that you could probably do by using an on text command or an on. I guess probably an on text. It's probably a text command, maybe a window command for the revert method. But it's nice to not have to do it that way. And on new window. And what might that take? Let's see. If I create one, it takes one positional argument, but two were given. It gets the new window from the looks of it, which I intuit by saying that on new window gets called with a window ID. And I take one argument, but it thinks that I should get two. So we probably want something like window.window ID. It's just window.id, I think. I can't remember. Let's go over here. There's a specific thing. Yeah, it's just ID. Okay. So when we do it, our new window is 4. Our new window is 5. Nice. And that's also one of those things that traditionally, if you wanted to know if a new window was being created, you could track, use an on window command to know when the new window command is executed. And then you'd know that a new window was being created. However, that's error prone because on Mac OS, you can create a new window if there isn't one already by clicking the dock icon and a new window opens. That's just something that happens in the core of the application because it's a Mac OS application. So it wouldn't, you wouldn't be able, that command wouldn't get executed and you wouldn't be able to tell. And the flip side of this is on pre-close window, like so, and say Windows closing, and like so. And is there there's an on pre-close, right? So we can do this to say this window is going here, and then when we close this window with the close command, we can see window is closing. Pre-close means that it's happening before the window is closed, so you have a chance to do something with it. It doesn't look like there's an on window close. There's a similar thing for files, on pre-close and on close. When the on close event happens for a file, it's already being closed, so the view is no longer associated with the window that it was inside of, although the view might still exist. So if you need to access the window that a file was in before it was closed, you have to use on pre-close to get that. That's the situation there. And on pre-close is something that is greatly appreciated, because in the same way that you could track if a new window was created by checking for the close window command to be executed, that doesn't get executed if you use the window Chrome to close the window. So that could be an issue. And it might allow us to do something like this. This is the sort of thing that a lot of people want. Yeah, there's just a new line in there. This is one of those things that a lot of people want, that I think Sublime Text 2 used to be able to do. You used to have a default window layout, so you could have like default 2 columns or whatever. And then in Sublime 3, they changed it so that it's always just a single empty window. But now when we create a window, it just automatically has this layout. Which is nice from the perspective of, you could do something like this with origami. You could probably say new window from saved layout and bind that to a key. But now you don't even need origami if you wanted to do something like this. So a plugin that sets the default window to be 2 columns is now as simple as this. Do you need any extra packages and plugins? No, you could just do this, and now let's join that because that's probably not going to work. Every window I create just has 2 columns, even on macOS when I click that thing. Is there some setting you did to get a new window to be centered? No, that's just something that it's doing for me here. There may or may not be a setting in the session that tracks something like this, but I think by and large it's something to do with the window manager. I'm not sure. If I maximize this window and close it and then create a new one, that one tends to be still in that position. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And I've never really paid that much attention to it. There are, I think, like default window, or people have asked for the ability to specify the size of a window when it's created, and I think if you check the issue tracker, that's never actually been done, and there may be reasons why they didn't want it too. I'm not sure. Excuse me. But yeah, so that's handy. This one plugin, this 2 lines, or 1, 2, 3 lines, 4 lines, is all you need to have. Man, I'm dying. It's all you would need to have a default window layout of a particular thing. So that's pretty handy all on its own. I'm going to comment that out though, because that would probably drive me nutty. I do like a double column, but there's potential issues where that might cause a problem. If we took it back to this, what happens to us if we said that we wanted to open settings? Okay. um, Fortunately for us, after the preferences command creates the window, it changes the layout on its own. If you were using a plugin that created a window and didn't do that, that could conceivably cause some level of weirdness. Probably nothing like super stellar or anything, If I was answering this question on Stack Overflow, that would just be one of those things that I would mention in there. There's an on pre move and an on post move, and I'm pretty sure we'd say let's do it this way: on pre move, and I'm wagering that this at least has a view, if not a window. I'm gonna say it just has a view because we could figure out. We could say print about to move that from this, and then we might say view.file, name or view.name, and view.window.id. And let's say we're going to violate all of the rules of common sense. Just moved. We're gonna violate all the rules of common sense to figure out if to do this without actually checking to see if it'll work. Yeah, that whole column, cells, rows thing is one of those little tricky things too. A couple of people have asked over the years on Stack Overflow how to set up uh, their own custom window layout, and every time I explain it, I also point out that by and large, you may want to install the origami package and use its ability to set the layout that you want, and then save it or use that command that I did to pull it, because it can be a lot easier to grok than having to work out how all of that stuff is happening. So here's the idea of, I think, what is going to happen here. I'm going to put this new window is window 15. We can see it there. I'm going to move it over to this desktop. And I'm going to say, I'm going to new view into file on this thing, so I have this clone. I'm going to drag this tab from this window, well, over to the window on the right desktop, and I think we should see it saying that it's moving from whatever this window is, and then moved to window 15. And let's see how correct my guess is. Drop it over here and let go. And it's about to move from 2, and it moved it to 15. So there you go. If you ever wanted to be able to track um, the movement of a view between windows, it's now possible to do that. You could also do this to know when something was dropped into your window. If you had a window where you wanted to apply certain settings to it or something, maybe you drag in a new tab and it doesn't do what you might expect, because like a project setting, for example, might not apply to a tab that's dragged in. So you could catch when a new tab is being added and do something to it, or maybe even grab the name if you're trying to keep your own list of files that are open in a window or in a group somewhere in a tab. So that's handy. Now, on new project, on load project, on pre-save project, on pre-close project. That would all be related to actually doing something with a project, which this window is. I have that closed, but I guess it's something that we could investigate. Def on, let's see, let's say on load project, yeah. I'm gonna assume that you get maybe the window. This is one of those, on load project. Would we get told the project that was loaded, or will we get told the window that a project was loaded into, so that we could do something with the window API's project data? Let's say that I'm going to open a new window, and let's say we open HyperHelp in here. Did we get any? We did. We got a print of a. And window is closing. We got a print of a Sublime window object right there. So loaded %s in %d. Oh, don't wrap that one like so. And then we could window.id that part. And the first part of this would be window dot that thing I don't remember. Project file name is the thing. Yeah, this whole I love projects and workspaces myself, and I'm not sure how much this, it probably doesn't come across as much when I'm doing live streams, but I very frequently use that to be able to change the folders that are open in the current window without having to have another window open. Just even temporarily, because the way that, my unsaved changes in this window would be back here again later on is, I find that a phenomenal thing. Oh, I broke that real good. Hang on. Especially at work, I say, weird. Oops, excuse me. At work, I'm working on something web development related. We're using Angular 8 and TypeScript and stuff, and we have one gigantic mono repository with like 30 packages in it. And I'm working on one of them, and there's one other one that I need to refer to sometimes. So I have a project that excludes all of the packages except for the two that I use, and I have them in the sidebar named as the name of the package that they refer to instead of the folder that they're in, so it's really clear looking at stuff. And then I also have another project for the same thing, but without the restrictions. So if I'm working on my package and I need to know the places where a certain thing happened, and I do one of those find in files, which there's still a video upcoming on that. I think it might be the one that comes after the last color scheme video. So that is coming soon. If I do a search for find in files and I know there's a thing I'm looking for and it doesn't come up, then I know it's not referenced in my package, or that other one I look at might be in one of those other ones. And it's just, like Control Alt P, down arrow, enter, and run the same find. And now it's searching all of the folders. And once I find what I'm looking for, I can use Control Alt P, down arrow, enter, and be back exactly where I was without having to have another window open, even though I do have a fair number of monitors. That's like ridiculously useful, I find. Um, so that's why I wanted to. Oh, whoops. That's why I wanted to do that video on projects and workspaces, because I think it's one of those things that a lot of people don't take advantage of as much as they could. And like there's definitely facility to just opening a folder temporarily, like dragging and dropping it on the icon in the dock to open a folder and stuff. But if you're working with the same folder like more than once or twice, I think you really owe it to yourself to play with workspaces and see what sort of action you can get going there. Why is this broken? Because I need one more of these things, because this one's for window ID and this one's for the tuple and one's for that. Okay, that makes sense. So if I did this now, it loaded Sublime Project in window 8. Nice. I'm going to close that window for right now. The other thing we can do here is well, we can do either on pre-save or on post-save, and the difference between those is, does the event trigger before the project data is saved, or does it get triggered after the project data is saved? I'm going to say that's how that works, because that's how all the other ones work. You choose on pre-save if you want to fiddle around with what's about to be saved, and you use on post-save if you want to know that a save happened. and you definitely want it to be done. And if you don't care and you just want to know generally a save is happening, pick one of the two and it'll tell you what you want to know. Yeah. So we might say, well, actually, let's just copy and paste this one down here, perhaps, like so. And this would say post save project, like so. So if we created a new window, we get a log that there's a new window, we can open the November project, like so, and close that. And we might say edit the project to get the project file, zoom the window, change this from Sudoku to Sudoku game. And when we save, what did we see here? Did we see a save? Did I not name that correctly? On post save project. On post save project. I don't see it saying saved in here. Let's just double check that I did that correctly. That seems like something that should work. Whoops, don't do that. It's going to get on post save project with a window ID. Yeah. Well, that really seems to me like that should have worked. Maybe it is for when a new project is created and not for when just a standard. I'm going to do that and clear this. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. There we go. Loaded. It's tracking those two folders. Put this back. What I'm actually doing here, I guess, is saving the Sublime project. So I guess this makes sense because what I'm actually saving is just a Sublime project file, and Sublime responds to the project file being saved by reloading it because it changed on disk. So what we might have to do is take an action that causes Sublime to modify the project on its own. And one way to do that would be to add folder to project. This one. There we go. Now we can see it say saved. And if we did save project as and saved it as delete me, we also see that as well. And I'm going to swap this back to the November project, and I'm going to remove that to put that back, close that window, and where would that have been? Local source, November 2019. If I remove this, then the next time I quit and restart Sublime, the session cleaner we worked on last session will automatically throw that one out. So we can detect if a project is loaded or saved. So that's nice. I wonder, there's a project that, a package for modifying, working with projects that doesn't use the quick switch project. And I'm not sure why people don't like this per se. I guess the visual display, I think people are not happy that the Sublime project and Sublime workspace file names appear in here. I'm a little unclear on why that is, but there's a project to let you work with, or a package to let you work with projects better. So this might be nice for that. Plus, I think there are now commands that let you load a project, which previously you couldn't do. Previously, you could only trigger the prompt load, but I think now you can specifically say load this project in this window, which is something I have played with before in the past. The last thing that's mentioned here is that the fixed on selection modified to not be called twice when left clicking. Um, and that is less interesting. So view.add regions now has an annotations parameter. Is Stealthy and Hasty accepting contributions of any sort? I don't see why not. Right now, that actually is the result of I used to have a repository in my own account named Sublime Scraps, which I think is what it's named now in Stealthy and Hasty in that organization. Um, and we being Keith Hall and I, or King Keith, as you might know him from the Discord and stuff, decided that there was some stuff that we wanted to work on together. So we created our own organization. But if you have any package contributions or plug-in things to add, feel free to throw a PR up, and one of us will do a review and merge. Even between the two of us, when I add anything or when he adds anything, we always do a little review to see uh, if there's anything we can, change to make it a little bit tighter or a little bit more explanatory. Because some of the plugins in there aren't as small and compact as they could be, because they're sort of meant to show examples of how you could do certain things. So some of them are not as Pythonic as they could be. But yeah, if you have any example plugins that you think would be useful, by all means throw some PRs in there. I guess you have to fork the repository or something. Yeah. I've been working with Team Fortress or the Team Foundation server far too long. I'm forgetting how things work on GitHub in that sense. Uh, oh, here's something I just remembered. You can get the workspace file that's associated with the project that you currently have going on. If we created a new thing, this doesn't have one, but if we added a project to it or a folder to it, like, well, yeah, sure, why not? And then save workspace as. I'm going to put this in my home directory as delete me 2 so that it's actually in there. Now it has a workspace name, but it doesn't have a project file associated with it. That's the sort of thing that was tricky to track previously. So that's a nice indication. Added open project or workspace command. Window.run command. Open project or workspace, and we need to provide it some argument. What might that be? Nope. I know this has been asked in the Discord, so I'm going to click a button, and I'm going to search for open project or workspace. So I know there's an argument for it. I think I've discovered it by looking in the... Really? We're going to say that, huh? Wait, am I searching in the wrong thing? Whoops. Maybe if I spelled it correctly. And open project or workspace with a file. Oh yeah, okay, I remember now. You pass it a file, but it ignores it if you don't have a thing. So if I said home, oh, hang on, I did a thing. I gotta close Discord or I'm gonna lose track. There we go. If I did home tmartin and local source override audit override audit dot sublime dash project. This should, I think, zoop the focus away from this window to the one in the background because that project is currently open and this tries to focus the existing window the same way that open file will focus the tab if the file is already open instead of opening it again. Maybe that was changed because there used to be a new file argument that you could, or a new window argument. It replaces the project in the window. Oh, that's sorry. Yeah, it replaces the project in the window that you run it in unless it's already open in a window, and then it focuses that one instead. Do I not? Oh, haha, I see. I see. I see what I did there. It does work the way that I expect. I'm going to close this project here because this is open in the package folder. There's two override audits. There's one in local source, and then there's this one that's linked in my packages folder. They reference the exact same thing. It's just a symlink, but package resource viewer will only do, or sorry, automatic package reloader will only load things from the packages folder. So if I do that, I end up with the exact same thing because it's the exact same project, but now it's stored in a different place, or at least it should be, unless I picked the wrong one again. Hmm. Oh wait, that's the file that's open. Pardon me. Yeah, that's probably still the same. That's in my user package. Pardon me. So if I did this now, oh, and I suppose it's not going to remember it, is it? Run command, open project or workspace. You can set a specific layout when you load a workspace. Yeah, the layout of the window is stored inside of the workspace. That's why a project has a workspace associated with it, but workspaces don't necessarily have projects associated with them. So you can have the same project and 5 different workspaces depending on how you work on things. So you might have, if you're a web developer, you might have the HTML file open on one side and the CSS on the other, unless you're only working on content. And then you might have 2 horizontal tabs with 2 different pages open for you to look between or something along those lines. And you can use multiple workspaces into the same project so that you can still take advantage of the same folders and project settings without having to duplicate those, but have different layouts in different windows, or have different windows open at the same time that are associated with the same project. Home T Martin, local source, override audit. So now I think this should tell the command to open this, and because it's already in that other window in the background, it should jump to focus to that one, assuming I opened it correctly. Ooh. Oh, whoops. That's totally not how that works. There's a file argument here. That's just invalid JSON. I'm surprised that worked as well as it did. There we go. So doing that jumps us to there, right? Because this project is already open over there. But there is an argument we can pass to tell it not to do that. And we're going to close that, and we can say something like new window true. Nope. False. The default is true. No. Hang on. Let me double check. John actually mentioned this. I said it looks like it replaces the project in the window that you run it unless the project is already open, and then it focuses that one instead. That's tricky to test because it kept swapping the project in the window and replacing the input history. John said it takes two arguments, file and new window, the latter being a bool, which defaults to true. So by default, that command would open something in a new window and not in the current window. So it's going to always focus, if a project is open, it's always going to focus that project if it's open. So if I took this argument out and changed this to, say, hyper help, and I think that's what the project is. I think we should get, no, that is not what it is. I'm going to jump into the terminal real quick. Lower, oh, it's hyper help core. Oh, okay. All right. Like so. That is opening it in the current window. No, it's not. It is created. It has created a new window. This is the thing I alluded to on. Go away. This is the thing I alluded to in the other thing. This is the one where I ran it for override audit. And this is that one. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit a new window, move this one over here so we can see what it's doing. And once again, screwed. Window dot, I gotta copy this thing, man. Open project or workspace. On the other hand, the idea that the more you do something, the more you remember it, I guess I probably won't forget this anytime soon. Probably not, at least till Wednesday. Home, T Martin, local source, hyperhelp core dot, oops, hyperhelp dot sublime dash project. Now there is an argument to this thing for new window. Let's do it this way to save ourselves the hassle, which defaults to the value of true, I think he said. So if I set this to false, I'm going to copy this thing, then the current window becomes the hyperhelp window, project window, like so. And it's got all that stuff in it because I told it to not open it in a new window. And when this reloads, one of the things that it's with the reason this is screwing me up here is that the history in the console is one of the things that's stored in the session information, which is great if you wanted to remember what the last thing was that you did when you were working with hyperhelp, but not so much when you're trying to recall a long, complicated command. I'm going to create a new thing, and I'm going to move that over here, and I'm going to paste that in, but this time I'm going to set this to true. This is the default. If you don't specify new window true, John said this argument defaults to true. So this should do the same thing it did before, only instead of putting the project in this window, it should open it in a new one. But it doesn't, unless I pasted that incorrectly. And now I'm going to have to do it again because it messed stuff up. If I said new window false, wait, if I said new window false, it should go in this window because I don't want it to be in a new window. But if I wanted it to be in a new window, that should be in a new window. But it seems to do the same thing both ways. So it seems to me someone somewhere doesn't know what they're talking about, and it's probably me. New underscore window, the latter being a bool, which defaults to true. Well, I shall figure this out or not, because it's only of academic interest. If I do it with false, it most definitely replaces this, which is what we would expect. And if we create a new window and paste it and set new window to be true, it still does it in this window. So that may be a regression, or maybe I'm doing something wrong. That I am not too sure about. View.element returns a string describing widget views. I think we've seen this in the view.element. Returns a string describing a widget view. Element takes one positional argument, but two were given. Hmm. View.element returns a string describing widget views. View dot v dot element for v in Sublime. No, shoot, nickel. I'm going to go ahead and do something like this. What's this? I'm going to click a link over here, and I'm going to see a normal view will return none, whereas all built-in views will return a string. Okay. So we are going to I'm gonna shoot doodle. Yeah, I'm gonna copy this whole line, paste it in here, like so. And I'm gonna go back to this. I could have sworn that this was touched on. What does a widget view mean? A widget view is this input right here, or this one down here that you type into the console, or when you do a quick panel and that thing pops up. Also, I think these things here as well. These, anywhere where you can enter text, more or less being equal, anything where you can enter text, including these fields and files, is a view as far as Sublime is concerned. So you can trigger text commands in here. That's why you can paste stuff in, for example. Whoops. But those ones are special, so they have a setting in them, is widget, that's set to true, or at least they used to. I'm not sure they still do because this thing exists now. And if I do this, now what this is going to do is create a string, a list of items, by joining this list together that we're creating here. And the list of things here is ranging over the number from 0 to 14 and creating a view out of it. Because back at the beginning of, near the beginning of this stream, I mentioned that in this sublime.py thing here, and actually we might even be able to see this if there's the view class. If you wanted to, the view class takes a parameter, the init thing. Oh, is that actually in here? Here's the class that represents a view. Its constructor takes a view ID and it stores that locally. It creates a selection object based on that ID, and it goes from there, right? You can actually create your own view by calling that constructor and giving it a view ID. And the Sublime API does that. The internals of the core is what keeps track of the actual state of a view, and it's exposed to plugins as just an integer number. And when you create a view object, you give it that integer number as its view ID, and then anytime anything in that class interacts with the core, it just passes the view ID. So when you do something like, I'm gonna just cut that for a second. If you were to do like print view, you get a view object at a specific location in memory. Notice it's changing every time. Every time you do this, that appears to be changing because it's a new view object that's being created. But if you did this, the view ID is always 375. It's just creating a new instance of the class every time you do it. So uh, this thing that we're doing here can create its own instance of the view class, which it has to get at from the namespace Sublime, because otherwise you'd have to import from Sublime import view to be able to see the class. It can create an instance of that class, and if its element doesn't return none, then it gets created, it calls it, and joins it with a string. And it goes over the predefined view IDs of 0 to 14, which are all of the everything that's created in the window is a view of some sort. Like I said, this is the console output. I think it might not be, because it might be special because it's read only, but all of the files, the tabs, the things in the command palette, and this thing tells us about them. So the ID with the view with ID go to anything is an input widget for, is that a, oh yeah, 0 and 1 are special, not special. 2 is, 3 is the input widget, 4 is the console input widget. So I think if you did something like this, there's the text. I threw an, I shouldn't have put that that new line on it. But this allows you to create, figure out what various views are. So in the old days of Sublime Text 3, we might be able to, and I'm not sure if this is still the case, get, because of this new thing, there's a setting called isWidget. And this isWidget setting is set to true in things where it's a widget. That is, it's a text input, but it doesn't represent a file of some sort. The core puts that into the settings so that you as a plugin author could do something like in our one of our text events, we could decide that we you might want to do something like every time a view gets focused, insert the text hello world. But you don't want that to happen when the command palette input opens, because it would always type that in there. So you would test to see if the view has the setting isWidget in order to do that. And if isWidget returns true, then that is, that's not a place you should do that. If we did it here, we should get, I think, nothing at all, because it's not, I don't think it's set to true or false. I think it's just not there at all. So if we did has, it returns false, but this one up here returns true. This is how it used to work in Sublime 3, and it's still kind of working here, but it was sort of notoriously unreliable because it's possible through various actions for the isWidget setting to be clobbered out of there accidentally or on purpose by someone, or set to false or something, in which case your plugin goes a little doolally when that thing hits. But now the new builds have this new API method called view.element that allows you to ask a view, are you special? It'll return none for a file, and it returns a string that says what it's for. So this is how you could do something like fiddle around with the inputs for the find, the location, and the replace text in the find in files panel. This is referring to the output panel for build output, which is, something that's not listed in here at the moment. The find and the find and replace panel has a find and replace view. So if you wanted to know those, you could. The incremental find, which I think is Control I, and it automatically searches like that, is one of those as well. And I guess also find has the same sort of thing. So we could actually do something like that thing I just did here. This one. And if you set this to 6, then I guess if you open the find panel, it has that text. So if you ever wanted to create a key binding that opens the find panel with the find text already populated in, there is a way to do that now in a way there wasn't a way to do it before. Now the problem with this, such as it is the reason why this is working the way it is this range is just arbitrarily going from 0 to 14. If you had 2 windows like this, I'm just going to move this one off to the side because we don't care. If I do that thing now, we still get that goes up to 12 like that. But if I made this, say, 30, then you can see that there's 2 sets of them. There's some extra ones now, or there's a couple of extra ones now. There's this one and this one. I'm going to open the find panel over in that window and then come back and do that again. And then we can see there's, there's another, there used to be one find input at 6, and now there's a find input there. Find in files, but there's definitely extra. Oh, actually, let's see. What does this say about output? Output is just a general output panel, pardon me. The one for build systems is exec:output. And input:input is the input for the input panel, which is the one you get if you do that view.show input panel thing. You can get the view related for that as well. So to some degree, if you want to fiddle with something like this, normally you would just have a view and you could call the view element method. But if you wanted to actually find the find input in a particular window, then you need to do more magic and try to figure out what the view ID is. That actually might be a way higher value than just 30 now that I think of it. I'm going to make it like 100. No? Because the reason why these ones have such low view IDs, generally speaking, is because they're created right away. So let us continue. What is this? I'm currently live, and I'm 10 minutes over my 2-hour limit, but I'm not done playing yet. So what else can we fiddle with here? We did open project or workspace or file name, assign syntax, now fully supports scope names. Yeah, that one's interesting. The normal way to set a syntax in something, if I did something like view settings, get syntax, it's going to tell me that. And one thing I could do if I created a new tab like this is set the setting syntax to this string. We can see down there it says plain text. It's a plain text thing. And when I hit this, it becomes Python because I set that particular setting. And while this works, it's not really the way that you should do it because there's extra action that has to happen behind the scenes. And I'm not, let's see if I can, if I looked, actually, let's say syntax specific settings for Python. Yeah, perfect. See, my syntax specific settings for Python say I want 2 rulers, one at column 79 and one at 80, right? Here, there's 2. There's one at 79 and there's one at 80. In this one, there's not. There's a ruler is way out here. And if we looked in here, it's set at just 80. There's no ruler for 79, which is weird because this is the syntax in that syntax specific settings, right? And This is the reason why you should never set a syntax by setting the setting for the syntax. What you actually want to do in order to do something like that, so whoops, again, this is plain text. Hopefully that's visible down underneath my head, but I could also do this. It's the plain text. What you actually want to do is say view.assign, whoops, assign syntax, and then assign the syntax like that. And now it is Python like it should be, but it has both rulers now. So because the internals for settings require things to know that the setting changed. Now, I think this might also be something, I can't remember who it was who asked. It might have been you, it might have been someone else. Um, that there's several places where settings can appear. I think it was someone else. There's the default preferences, and then there's um, your user settings. There's that platform specific settings that gets applied before your user settings. So if you're on like OS X, you can always yeah, that rulers are very handy in that regard. They can use the rulers for word wrap or just to show you relative widths and stuff. I use 79 and 80 here because I want to stop at 79, but I also, 80 is okay too. So I put like a little double ruler there to remind me. Um, but when it comes to settings, there's like a bunch of different places. There's the default settings from the default package. There's the platform specific settings from the default package, then your user settings, then the project specific settings if you're using a project, then there's the syntax specific settings apply, and then view specific settings. Like if down here you did something like view.syntax, and all of those settings apply in a hierarchy such that if this setting over here doesn't have the setting, then Sublime looks one back to this one and says, do you have the setting? And if it doesn't, it looks one back to here and says, do you have the setting? And it keeps doing that until it finds where along the hierarchy of settings a settings object says that it has the setting, and that's the one that it uses. Otherwise, the setting isn't set. That's why your user settings doesn't have to have all of the settings. It only needs to have the ones you want to change. And anytime anything asks, if your settings object doesn't happen, it just automatically goes back one. That hierarchy is the reason why you can't iterate the keys in a settings object to be able to see what all of the values are, because it's not actually one object. It's like a chain of 7 objects or some number of objects in memory that it's sort of looking back through. So in order to iterate it, it would have to gather all of the keys from all of the settings all at once. And that, is something that I guess maybe performance uh, bad or something. Um, and this also goes to the idea that when you call Sublime load settings, you get a settings object. And then anytime you yeah, do you ask? I remember you asked that if you can get all settings keys in one go, and the answer to that is no. Technically, yes, if you wanted to brute force it by asking the settings object if it has every possible string in existence, but it would probably take a long time, so it's probably not a good idea. If you want to know all of the view settings that are set, you could introspect the session information to some degree, but that's not very good either. But when you load settings, you call Sublime load settings, you get a settings object. That settings object is just one of those ones from the hierarchy that's loaded in memory. So that's why every time you call load settings, you just get that same object back every time. And even if you don't call load settings, if one plugin calls load settings and another plugin calls load settings for the same file name, they get the same settings object, or probably an object that's different every time, but with a different settings ID in it, as we saw in this plugin file here. When this one, when it creates a selection object based on a specific ID. I think it does that as well for settings as well. We could look in here to see. But the general idea there is if this plugin changes the settings object, this plugin will see those changes even though it hasn't loaded because it's referring to the same thing. If you just set the setting, then the syntax will change, which will change the top level scope and stuff, but it doesn't tell Sublime that it needs to re-update the hierarchy of settings. It still takes the default settings for the syntax that it had. It doesn't take that settings object out and replace it with the syntax specific settings, because it would require it to watch carefully what setting you're applying. So instead, there's this assigned syntax that you can use, does the same thing but sets the settings correctly. And one of the nice new things about the new builds of Sublime is, instead of, if I wanted this new tab to be Python, instead of having to say packages python.sublime syntax, requires me to know the name of the syntax and the name of the package that it's in, and whether it's a Sublime syntax or a TM language file, which it could be one of either. I can now just say, I think scope source.python, because I want this file to be a Python file, and this is the scope for a Python file. And now it is Python, which is something that we can do now. And you could do it, I believe, in Sublime Text 3. That will still work, but and this is one of those things where I'm not entirely sure if this is immediately visible, but down here in the status bar, it says Python right now. In older builds of Sublime, if you did this, it would work, but instead of saying Python down there, it would say scope source Python, because there wasn't sort of a reverse mapping of things. So that's a fancy new feature that we have here. I think we can even say, I can't remember what this thing is called. Oh, sorry, it is a new another new thing related to that is being able to do this. I'm going to pull just the first one out, but this method gives you a list of every syntax, what its syntax file is, what its name is, whether or not it's hidden, and what its scope is, which is nice because if we look at scratch buffer, the thing that I use when I say scratch buffer prompt for syntax, and it shows me this list of all of the things. We are gathering that here, and this is one of those things that's in the Stealthy and Hasty repository. We're gathering this by finding the list of every, where is it, down in here somewhere? If we were asking for it, syntax name, nope. Syntax list handler dot list items, this one here. We ask for Sublime, using that, find all of the resources that are TM language files and find all of the resources that are Sublime syntax files. Then once you have them all, look inside of them and see if you can figure out what the name is, which mostly works. But you'll note that this one with double quotes is a weird Sublime lib test empty name Sublime syntax file, which isn't as great as it could be as a name, but if it had a better name inside of the file, that would be a little bit nicer. So as a plugin author, if you need to know syntaxes, that's a nice new thing that we can play with. You can also do this, I think. No? It says that it's a thing, but it doesn't say what it's for. No, definitely a string, huh? That's interesting. Let's see if this has anything in it. I just noticed that now. Sublime.find syntax syntax definitions can be queried via list syntaxes and find syntax, but I'm not sure why it's returning what it's returning. Oh, it's a file name and a first line match. I getcha. Okay. So what we're looking for is find the syntax that would be used for bob.py, and it's Python, or bob.c, and it's C, or CPP is C++, or Sublime Syntax is the one from package dev. That's neat. And you can also use a first line match, if I remember that correctly. You can say bob.text or txt. That's going to be a text file, but if the first line of the file was bin bash, then you'd think it would be a shell script. Maybe that, did I do that backwards? Shebang. How embarrassing that I can't remember how that works. I'm not 100% sure that the bash syntax actually does that, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure of when that does off the top of my head. That one might do that, but I think you need more stuff. In any case, that's a handy way to do something like that. Assign syntax now fully supports scope names. Assigning a syntax no longer removes widget settings files from a widget view. All right, that would be one of those examples of the thing where I said that sometimes the is widget setting goes away. One of the ways that that could happen would be is if you try to apply a syntax to the thing. I think there are other ways to do that too. Open. Append command has a new optional disable tab translation argument. Improvements to the API apply to the new thing only. You can load a binary resource. It returns bytes instead. You can iterate over selections and regions, and settings can now be treated like a dict. That's not something that you could do before. And I think what that means is this. That didn't used to work. You'd have to use the .get syntax instead. But now you don't have to do that. So that's cool. And I think that is pretty much all of the stuff that's in here, except for that whole on-query completions thing, which, as I said, I have played with that before. That's pretty neat. But I have gone 24 minutes over the amount of time that I was actually planning to do here. So I'm going to say that perhaps it is time to call her quits. So thanks so much for watching. This is actually pretty interesting. I have been thinking of the possibility of taking the content of some of these live streams and clipping parts of them out for videos on the channel, sort of as maybe a side series or something. I don't know if I'd put them on this channel or the main channel, but this would be a good one because we got a lot of good questions and discussion in here, complete with the playing around, showing how things work, including a little bit of that whole sometimes you get stuff wrong. Because going back to that whole idea of is there such a thing as a dumb question, I think it can really help people to note that everybody makes mistakes, and just because someone seems like they know what they're talking about doesn't mean that there's not a whole lot of fumbling around and looking at files to see what the heck is going on. But I think that is going to do it for this stream tonight. We're definitely going to be having one next week. I'm going to click this thing to see what actual day that is. That's the 11th. Yeah, so Fan Expo is coming up after that, but we will totally be here. We'll probably, hopefully, fingers crossed, have an actual plan for what it is we want to do in that one. I'm still not entirely sure. I think it might be time to bite the bullet and go back to Override Audit's ability to generate patches, unless the new builds of Sublime come out and they are accompanied with documentation and we can get to work doing some more work on hyperhelp. Although I do kind of want Will to finish his package dev stuff. So I think that's going to cut it. Remember, you can always subscribe to this channel if you'd like to view, get told when these streams are happening, and hop in like Ashwin does and get questions asked, or view the streams. And if you'd like to watch shorter, more focused videos, link down in the description to my other channel where I do Sublime Text tips, tricks, and tutorials, including coming soon more videos on this very topic here, sort of like what we did here in an impromptu fashion. So those are coming pretty soonish as well. Hopefully real soon if the new build of Sublime drops soon. Otherwise, we may have to do some backtracking. But until then, good night, everyone. This is OdatNurd asking you to please have a sublime day.